Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you happen to be. Uh, this is John Sangenberger. I'm Executive Director of Alumni Relations at the Tepper School of Business, and glad to have you with us today. As you can see, all our participants' videos and microphones are turned off for our presentation today, but you can ask questions by using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Thank you to all of you who've already answered some questions for us. We really appreciate it. We've already submitted questions, so we'll be asking them during the presentation today. And again, the panel is being recorded. Well, we're so happy to have you with us, joining us for this presentation on the impact of COVID-19, the coronavirus, on the entertainment industry. And we're so happy to have one of our outstanding experts at the Carnegie Mellon, Professor Michael Smith. So thank you for joining us. Glad to have our Heinz alumni colleagues, as well as our Tepper alumni and CFA and all the great schools at Carnegie Mellon. Thank you for joining us today. I think you'll be interested in what we have to say today in our presentation. Let me say we're very excited about the new dean, Isabelle Beju, who is going to be starting at the Tepper School on October 15th, so just 2 days away. We're very happy to have her joining us, and she'll be sending out an announcement to all of our video welcome to all of our alumni, so look forward to that coming on Wednesday. We also wanted to let you know about Intersect at CMU. It's our annual cross-campus collaboration conference that we do. This year it's on COVID-19 learning to action, and we are excited to be able to do our last presentation on it on the economy. So that's session number 4. We've got some great, as you can see, some great speakers coming from the Heinz College as well as from the Tepper School. Both of our deans will be on there. So for all of our Tepper and Heinz alumni, you want to make sure you catch on that. That's Thursday at 1 p.m. You can register for that online. We also have lots of programs going on in addition to our webinar series and other executive ed programs. We've got some great calendar of events coming up for you, so we want to make sure you take advantage of that. There are some free online webinars coming up from on our Leadership Rising and our Tech Chat series as well. And our next 2 webinars currently scheduled are going to be Julie Thornton, who is our executive alumni coach, is going to be talking about what's next, advancing your career during these uncertain times. So for those of you who don't know Julie, she's outstanding. So if you're thinking about reflecting on your career and thinking about a possible change, now is a great time to listen to Julie when she talks. Professor D.K. Lee, Dr. Lee is going to be talking, doing a roundtable in early December on the impact of COVID-19 on the retail industry. We've got a great panel of alumni experts in the retail field who'll be talking about what it's done for them. We also have a great panel that we're talking about the influence of big tech and some of the challenges that are coming up, and we'll be announcing that as well soon. But today, I'm so happy to be able to introduce our faculty speaker, Michael Smith. He is the Erik Jonsson Professor of Information Technology and Marketing and co-director of the IDEA Center, the IDEA Initiative for Digital Entertainment Analytics at Carnegie Mellon. He also teaches at the Tepper School. He's received his Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering and his Master's from the University of Maryland, then went on to the Sloan School of Management at MIT. He's gotten so many awards, I couldn't list them all on our screen today, but he's received the National Science Foundation's prestigious Career Research Award, Best Teacher Award, one of the top engineering minds, technology minds coming up in our country. So very proud of him. His book, Streaming, Sharing, Stealing, Big Data and the Future of the Entertainment Industry, helped to make him the expert that he is with his co-author from the Heinz College. Prior to his PhD, some of you may be saying, what did he do then? He was involved extensively in telecommunications and information industries, first with GTE and then with Booz Allen and Hamilton. He's also a regular on NPR Marketplace. You might hear him being consulted on all the news that's happening in the entertainment industry. And you're going to hear some of that today because there's a lot of late breaking news. Not only is it Amazon Prime Day and the new day for Apple to announce its products, but there's always something going on in entertainment and technology. So let me ask you to join me in welcoming Michael Smith. Mike, great to have you with us.
John, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me and for this opportunity. I'm going to take over and share my slides. Can everybody see my slides? All right. So the talk I want to give today is how COVID is influencing power in the entertainment industry. And what I'll say is, shortly after I sent the slides, my final deck of slides to John and his team, some very interesting things happened. So early yesterday, the European Cinema Association came out and condemned Disney for its decision to release the next Pixar movie, Soul, on Disney Plus instead of in theaters. So Disney announced that it was going to release Soul on Disney Plus for free. So if you're a Disney Plus subscriber, you can see it. So different than what they did with Mellon, where they asked you to pay $30 to see it. They're going to release this, major movie solely as part of the Disney Plus bundle. And not surprisingly, a bunch of European cinemas were very frustrated about that and argued that this was a poor decision for Disney. Later that afternoon, so later yesterday afternoon, Disney made a big announcement that they're actually going to reorganize the company around the streaming business, so that they're going forward, their focus is going to be on streaming as a key driver of the company's success. And then this morning, for those of you who wander around on Variety, AMC Theaters came out and announced that they might not have enough cash to make it to the end of 2000. So like I said, these stories came out after I sent the slides to John, but I think we can actually use the slides to draw a straight line through each of these stories to better understand how COVID is changing the entertainment industry. And let me try to do that by hearkening back to the book John mentioned. So this is a book, I'll say that Rahul and I have covered our advance on this book. So every time somebody buys a copy, we get $1.16. So my wife and I have 3 kids we're trying to put through college. I'll just say it makes a nice Christmas gift if you're so inclined. But the goal of the book was try to say, number one, why are the technologies that the studios are facing today a threat to their business model in a way that they haven't faced over the last 100 years? So if you look at the studio business, it's been an incredibly stable market. The same 6 studios have dominated the industry for the 100 years preceding the rise of the internet. Why would the internet be any different? The first question we're trying to answer is, here's why the changes you're facing today are different. The second question is, how is this likely to play out in the market? And the third thing we tried to address in the book was, what should studios do to respond? And our argument in the book was that studios should reverse the game on Netflix and Amazon and Google. The argument was Netflix and Amazon and Google are taking their distribution platform and vertically integrating upstream into the creation of content. The studios should vertically integrate downstream and start their own distribution platforms. And while I won't claim any causation, it's been heartening to see both Disney Plus and HBO Max and Peacock do exactly that, changing their business model to focus on streaming as part of their platform. Now, not surprisingly, the rise of these streaming platforms has created a lot of frustration among theater owners. So this is a public note that John Fithian, president of NATO, sent out on Box Office Pro to the studios. And it starts with pop quiz. Of the 59 movies Netflix released last year, how many have you seen? What's the highest grossing Netflix movie of all time? And how many Academy Awards has Netflix won for its feature-length movies? And the basic argument was that Netflix is making a huge mistake by not releasing their movies in the theaters like everyone else. And in fact, the point he's making is in this paragraph. Netflix movies rarely garner significant public attention. Okay. A little bit after that, Rahul and I wrote a piece for HBR that said, with all due respect, we believe Mr. Fithian has it backwards. Couldn't the studios make more money by adopting the model that Netflix is using? And the argument we were making is that in the book, what we said was there are two advantages of having a platform that the studios will get from having a platform. The first advantage is they'll get control over their customers. Prior to launching these platforms, the studios didn't own the customer interface in any of their business models. They were heavily reliant on Netflix and Amazon and Google to share data with them so they'd understand their customers. And they really didn't know much about the individual customer in any of their other channels, right? Nielsen will tell you the average number of people who watched a show last night, but it won't tell you anything about those people as individuals, what else they watched, why they watched it, and it certainly won't give you an opportunity to promote your content directly to them. By going with the platforms that Disney and Warner and Universal launched, they're getting access to that customer data. The second reason, though, we think these platforms are valuable is because it gives you the opportunity to execute a different business model. One that drives more profit, as I'll argue in a second, one that gives you big scale advantages, and one that actually allows your customers to explore content much more than they otherwise would be able to. So let me just quickly review what I mean by that. The way the studios have always released content is in this staggered release model. They first release movies in theaters, and then they wait about 3 months and they release it on home entertainment channels so you can buy it on DVD. And then they wait another 6 months and they release it on pay cable. And then they release another 2 years after that, and you can watch it on broadcast TV. This is a classic price discrimination model. The reason they do this is because there are different customers in the market who have radically different values for the product. And what you're trying to do is release the product in a way that you get the high value people to pay a high amount of money, the medium value people to pay a medium amount, and the low value people to at least give you something. So the idea here is, my daughter is a huge Marvel fan. If she's going to have to see Avengers Endgame 12, the sequel, on the opening weekend. So she's a high value person and she's going to pay a lot of money to see it on the opening weekend. There are other people who are casual fans. They're willing to wait 3 months to buy it on DVD and watch it as many times as they want. And then there are, sort of the really low value fans who are going to be willing to wait 6 months to a year to watch it when it comes out on broadcast. This way of releasing content allows the studios to get revenue from each of those segments. Okay. COVID has thrown this model into complete chaos. So if you think back over the last 6 months or so, you may recall that in April, Universal said, hey, you know what, the theaters are closed, so we're going to release Trolls World Tour directly to consumers and bypass the theater altogether. For $20, you can get a 48-hour rental. About a week later, AMC Theaters came out and said, that's fine, but we're now going to boycott all Universal Studios movies, which was actually a pretty, scary proposition for Universal, because their business model depended on being able to release their movies in theaters. If AMC, one of the largest chains, was going to boycott them, their ability to make money was in severe jeopardy. And a couple months later, they announced a truce that would allow Universal to release movies on their other channels after a 3-week, not a 3-month, a 3-week exclusive period in the theaters. And AMC would get a share of Universal's revenue on their home entertainment sales. Okay. Later that month, Hamilton released on Disney Plus, free with subscription. And I know this because my daughter woke me up at 7 a.m. the morning of the release so she and I could watch it together. And then in September, Disney released Mulan on Disney Plus, but not free with subscription, for $30. So for an extra $30, you could watch Mulan. And then over the past couple months, we've seen a bunch of movies come out in theaters and not do as well as people expected. Tenet is the classic example. And that's led a bunch of studios to delay their releases of big movies into 2021. Okay, and the whole point of this slide is just that the studios are heavily dependent in the current business model on the theater owners, and the theater owners have a lot of power over them. The next thing I'd like to point out is that's not the only way to do price discrimination. The other way to do price discrimination is to do it in the bundle. So what the studios have always done is they've tried to sell a product to different consumers who have different values of that product. What Netflix does in the bundle is they actually sell a single bundle of a bunch of products that individual consumers might have different values of, but when you average it out, it turns out to be more profitable. So this is Erik Jonsson and Yanni Bakos. Erik was my advisor at MIT, so deference to him. They wrote this wonderful paper called Bundling and Competition on the Internet, and it had three main findings. The first is selling information goods like movies in a bundle is actually more profitable, or can be more profitable, than selling the same goods separately. So a seller typically can extract more value from each information good when it's part of a bundle than when it's sold separately. The second thing they showed is that bundles are heavy scale plays. So basically what they found was that the biggest bundle wins, and the biggest bundle is able to outbid smaller bundles for upstream content. And then the last thing they found is that in a bundle, consumers will explore content more than they otherwise would. So you'll see things in the bundle because it's free that you wouldn't have purchased or wouldn't have watched if you had to pay a separate fee for it. Imagine all the stuff you took a chance on Netflix solely because it was free that you might not have watched in the theaters. Okay. The scale point, I think, should make the studios rather frightened. So if you look at the number of subscribers each of the major streaming platforms has out there, Disney Plus is by far the leader among the studios with 60 million subscribers. Disney Plus blew away its subscriber goals, its 5-year projections for subscribers in the first month. It's been extraordinarily successful. And yet it still has only a third the number of worldwide subscribers as Netflix. If the biggest bundle actually has advantages over smaller bundles, Disney should be worried about this. All right. The other thing I'll point out is that there are nice complementarities between these two advantages. So every time somebody explores a movie on Netflix and either finishes it or doesn't finish it, that actually gives Netflix data about that customer and allows them to promote content much more efficiently to that customer. But the bundled business model also gives Netflix huge advantages when it comes to how they release their movies. So Netflix started by releasing their movies on the same day in theaters as they did on streaming. And then over time, they released some of their movies after a week of an exclusive run in the theaters. And recently, they've sort of settled on this 3-week release strategy. So Roma, The Irishman, and The Trial of Chicago 7, which comes out this Friday, were all available for 3 weeks exclusively in the theaters before they were available on Netflix, largely to make them qualify for the Oscars. But still, gave them a lot of flexibility in how to release things. Now, let's go back to John Fithian's concern, right? In 2018, he said, hey, you know what? Netflix movies just haven't been that successful. Releasing it directly to Netflix doesn't get you the eyeballs you need, doesn't get you the cultural conversation you need, and certainly doesn't let you win the awards you want. What's happened in the last, 2 years? Well, in the last 2 years, Netflix has actually changed that script. So in January 2019, Netflix movies received 15 Oscar nominations, 10 for Roma, which turned out to be third among all of the major studios. And I'm including Netflix as a major studio because they're a member of the Motion Picture Association now. In February, Roma won 4 Oscars, which tied it for first among the major studios. This past January, Netflix received 24 Oscar nominations for The Irishman and went on to win 2 Oscars. And so, you know, and again, they're clearly positioning themselves in a rather dry year with Trial of Chicago 7 to be another big Oscar-winning movie. So what does all this mean when we think about what Disney announced yesterday? I think Disney is doing something incredibly smart by building their business around streaming. I think what they're saying is we've got to create a platform that's going to be able to compete with Netflix. And the only way we're going to get from the 60 million subscribers we have today to something approaching the 180 million subscribers that Netflix has is if we really start to focus on this. If we release world-class movies like Soul on our platform, that'll drive subscriber base. I think the other thing they're saying, which is interesting, is we think we now have an opportunity to exert our power over the theaters instead of having the theaters exert their power over us. So we don't think the theaters are in a position to dictate terms to us anymore. And we can actually get away with saying, no, we're going to release our movies on our streaming platform. If you want to show them too, that's fine, but it's your choice. The third thing I think they're saying, which I find absolutely fascinating, and we can talk about it in the Q&A time, why do they need to do a total reorg just to launch Disney Plus? And I'll argue that they needed to change their organizational structure, because the organizational structure they had and every other studio had was designed to protect the old business model. So if you look at a typical studio, they've got a president of theatrical, they've got a president of home entertainment, they've got a president of television, and they've got a president of international. And if you go back to the way movies are released, that entirely maps to the old business model of windowed releases. I release it first in theaters, then on home entertainment, then on television, and I do the same thing internationally. And each of those presidents is in charge of protecting their part of the business. I think what Disney realized is we can't go aggressively after streaming if we have an organizational structure with presidents whose job it is to protect the old business model. And if you go through and read the announcements that Disney made, subtly you'll see that there was some tension between the streaming platform and the theatrical platform. And this reorg, I think, was designed to get rid of that tension and make sure everybody was focused on making streaming great. For those of you who've taken my class, you'll recall one of the cases I do in class is informally called "Why Does Hulu Suck?" And the punchline of the case is part of the reason you would expect Hulu would have been really successful. It launched a year after Netflix. It was announced a year after Netflix announced its entry into streaming. And it had the content from 3 of the major studios. And yet, at least as of a year and a half ago, it was the 9th most popular streaming platform online. I think one of the reasons it wasn't more popular is because there was this conflict between the organizational structure of the studios and the needs of the streaming platform. I think reorgs like this will give studios an opportunity to really focus on their streaming platform. All right, last thing I'll say is John wanted me to stick to a half hour for the opening remarks. So one question you might have is, what should theaters do? I'm going to argue that I think theaters have been far too strident about the 3-month holdout period. So theaters, so you can say every time Netflix releases a movie in theaters, nobody watches it because it only gets released in a couple art house theaters in New York and LA. It's really not widely available. And yet a lot of us watch it once it's available on Netflix. The reason the theater owners have boycotted Netflix films is because they're worried that if you collapse that theatrical window, you'll really cannibalize theater sales. And B, they're worried about ceding power over to the studios. That if the studios are able to bypass them, that's going to damage their power. That's going to damage the theater owners' power in the market. I'd argue the second one has already left the barn, right? With HBO Max, with Disney Plus making this reorg, and with Netflix being the powerful player they are, the theater owners are no longer in the driver's seat. I think there's also reason to question that first assumption, the assumption that the theater owners have always had, that if we collapse the window from 3 months to just 3 weeks, that's going to cannibalize a lot of our sales. And I believe this because of research that some colleagues and I just finished, where we looked at the Korean theatrical market. In Korea, a lot of the Hollywood studios are releasing their movies in Korea after they've only been in the theaters for 3 weeks, not 3 months. And this gave us an opportunity to empirically study what happens to theatrical sales when a movie gets released early. And the surprising thing we found is that when movies get released early in the theaters in Korea, that it doesn't seem to impact theatrical sales. Or said another way, that 3-week holdout is enough to convince the people who are going to go to the theaters anyway to go to the theaters. The advantage of releasing after 3 weeks instead of 3 months, though, is that you end up making a lot more money, in part because that movie is still hot. So one of the problems with the 3-month holdout period is studios spend hundreds of millions of dollars to promote these movies in the theaters, and then they have to wait 3 months before it's available in the next channel. And so they have to people have forgotten about the movie during the intervening 3 months, and so they've got to do a whole bunch of new promotion in the new window. By releasing after just 3 weeks, they can sort of leverage some of that initial promotion, lowering their cost, and consumers are still interested, and so it increases their sales. So I think there's a win-win here if the theater owners would be willing to change their business model to say, we're willing to let you release it after 3 weeks instead of after 3 months. I think that's something where everybody could win. And I think it's something where the theater owners, if they really believe that the theatrical experience is inherently better than watching it at home, that's something they could double down on. Okay, so that's my last slide. And John tells me we will now go to audience questions. If you're shy about asking me questions here, I'll also say that my email address is on this slide. I'd be more than happy to interact with you. Okay.
Great, Mike. Thank you. Appreciate it. What a great opening for us. And Kenny, you can close down this slide and we'll go ahead and get started. Mike, let me ask you first question is, how did you get into this area of research? How did you start becoming an expert in entertainment and being contacted by studios and key players in the industry?
Great question. It turns out that so my dissertation research was on how digital markets behave differently than physical markets. So this was around 2000. And most of the research I was doing was looking at how a physical product sold in a digital channel changed behavior of buyers and sellers. What I think is really interesting about the entertainment industry is that we've not only digitized the channel, we've also digitized the product. You know, so we're no longer selling movies on DVD, we're now selling them digitally. And what my research tried to play around with was what changes when the product becomes digital. So one of the first studies I did was with a major publishing house. And their question was, we've always released released books in hardcover, and then we wait a year and we release the same book on paperback, same price discrimination strategy. Their question was, what's a Kindle? Where should we release it? You know, should we release it with the hardcover? Should we release it with the paperback? Where should we release it? And the conventional wisdom in the industry was, you'll make far more money by delaying the release of the Kindle a couple months after the release of the hardcover. So we did a study with this publishing house that looked at that empirically. And what we found is that when you release the Kindle at the same time as the hardcover, it doesn't cannibalize hardcover sales, and it radically increases your Kindle, your digital sales. It almost like consumers are either physical or digital. And if you give it to them in a digital channel, they'll buy it. And if you don't give them to it in the digital channel, they'll lose interest and find something else to do. So I sort of feel like the research has almost come back full circle, where we're looking at the same kind of question, just in the context of the movie industry.
Great. Well, we're going to go to some of the audience questions. We have a lot of them. I'd say the first bundle of them, if I could use that term, are movie theaters finished? I know here where I live, the AMC theater closed for COVID, but now it closed completely. It will not be open again. So what do you think? Could this be the end of cinemas? Or, some said maybe a potential renaissance of drive-in theaters or something during this time?
Like I said, there's no doubt in my mind this is going to hurt the whole exhibition business. They're going to become a much less powerful part of the chain. That said, I still think there's value in seeing the movie on a big screen. And I really think the theater owners have an opportunity here to put their money where their mouth is and say, we, for years have been saying there's unique value in seeing it in the theaters. If you really believe that, then, let's go with that. Let's create, let's show it in the theaters, and the people who get value from seeing it there will see it. And like I say, I don't think they have much to worry about the window collapsing from 3 months to 3 weeks.
Do you think it's too late for some of the theater chains to survive with COVID?
I think we're going to see a smaller number of theaters post-COVID. I think the big chains are going to have to radically restructure. But I also think there's an opportunity for the survivors to pivot their business and say, we're going to create a great theatrical experience for folks to see. The other thing our local theater has done, which I found really interesting during COVID, is they're renting out the theater. My daughter got together a bunch of her friends for $50, they were able to rent out a theater and watch the original Star Wars. So the theater owners might have to get creative about their business model, but like I say, I still think they can be an important part of the chain. They're just going to have to pivot from this demanding 3 months to allowing 3 weeks.
I think that's reassuring for those of us who count on theaters being open for a date night. So another question, how do you see the streaming trends impacting network TV? We really didn't talk about that in our talk today. So another part of the entertainment world.
Yeah, again, I mean, I see something similar where network TV is still going to be around, but for a lot of these shows, I think that the streaming experience is superior enough that it's going to be hard to get me to watch sitcoms on broadcast television anymore. Big nationwide shows, broadcast television will work just fine. But for sitcoms, I think the advantage of being able to stream it sequentially is huge. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, I think for the streaming platforms, they have a huge advantage when it comes to promoting content. Again, one of the things we talk about in the book is, why did Netflix greenlight House of Cards? Netflix greenlit House of Cards not because they had data that revealed to them that Kevin Spacey was a big fan. Everybody knew that Kevin Spacey had a lot of fans. The thing that Netflix had that nobody else had is they knew exactly who those fans were, and they could promote directly to those fans on their platform. Mm. Does that make sense, John? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, do you think the entertainment industry, particularly big budget movies, can be supported primarily at home viewing? So are the profit margins changing in this for them?
Let me go out on a limb and say I think they can. Right? Netflix spent a lot of money on The Irishman. Netflix spent a lot of money on Trial of the Chicago 7. They're able to do that because they have that scale that allows them to profitably do that. If you go back to the Brynjolfsson Bakos paper I mentioned, which will be on the final exam, by the way, that, one of their key findings is because the bundled model is more profitable for the largest bundler, they can actually outbid smaller bundlers for upstream content. I think we're starting to see that in Netflix. The key thing though is there are a small number of people who are going to be able to play in that game. It's going to be Netflix and maybe a couple more. And like I say, what I find so fascinating is Disney is clearly saying we want to be in that small group.
Well, how do you see the industry consolidation ramping up in the entertainment field?
I think we are going to see consolidation. I think, as we shift towards platforms, on the platform side, I think it's a scale play. But I think also on the customer side, it's a scale play in the sense that people aren't going to subscribe to 10 different platforms. It's just too confusing to remember what's on what platform, where to go. Where I think consumers are going to settle on a handful of platforms that they subscribe to. And those platforms, once they get the consumers, are going to have a better opportunity to get the content. And once they have the content, they're going to get more consumers.
Well, we'll come back to that. What about more TV-oriented things, especially live events, sports and reality TV and other things like that? Do you see the streaming services taking those over as well?
Yes and no, right? So live is obviously different. The value of a sports event watched live is very different than the value of that same sports event streamed a week later.
Right.
So I still think live is going to be important. Here's the fun thing Disney has, right?
Right.
Disney obviously has Disney, but it also has ESPN. And Disney, in its announcement, was very explicit about the fact that we're trying to create a platform that's going to bring those things together. Disney might be really well positioned to use their ownership over, their ability to have the live content to drive people to their platform. The other fun one, by the way, John, is who for a long time did HBO's back-end streaming? Again, trivia question. And the answer is HBO tried to code their own streaming back-end. They spent millions of dollars and hired really smart programmers to create the back-end for HBO, HBO Plus. And every time a new episode of Game of Thrones would drop, the whole thing would crash. And they eventually outsourced their back end to Major League Baseball Advanced.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that made sense is because Major League Baseball Advanced Media had already shown that it could scale to these live immediate audiences.
Great. Well, I think you've got quite a bit with the sporting area there too, to put that on live.
That's something that, again, what you want to do as a company is move in a direction where your competitor is going to have a hard time following you. Disney, by moving in the direction of combining live with pre-recorded, that's going to be something that I think Netflix will have a hard time copying.
Good. Well, do you foresee a point in the future with the proliferation of all these streaming services that they start to self-cannibalize the market? How many streaming services are you going to sign up for? How much TV can you, how many streaming things can you actually watch?
Yeah, like I said, I think we're going to see a consolidation down to a handful of platforms. I think Netflix obviously will be in that mix. Disney Plus has clearly made a play to be in that mix. I think HBO Max should be in that mix. I'm less confident about Peacock, and if anybody wants to ask me a specific question about that, I'll tell you why. But it's going to be a handful of providers.
Well, what's made Netflix so successful, and why are they coming out on the top in this process when originally they didn't even produce their own content?
That's been the fascinating story. I personally think Netflix has been so successful because they didn't have to fight the organizational inertia that the studios are having to fight. But B, I think Netflix has a business model that allows them to focus exclusively on the value they create for the customer. So if you think about a traditional broadcast model, who's the customer? And you can say, well, on one hand, the customer is the viewer, but on the other hand, the customer is the advertiser. And so if, in a broadcast world, you're always, walking this fine line between, I want to create value for the viewer, but I also want to create just as much inconvenience for the viewer that they'll watch my commercials. Netflix can say, hey, I'm trying to make as much value for you, the viewer, as possible. And I think that's played out very well for them.
Well, I'm going to switch angles here with some other questions we have from the audience. We'll probably come back to this again. But what do you see happening with live theatrical performances? And what do you see happening during this time? Can the live performing arts transition to digital outputs? They've got union demands, they've got artistic demands, challenges on that. What do you see happening there? We have a lot of alumni that are in that industry as well.
You're talking about live theater as in Broadway.
Yes.
To be honest, Broadway's still there. We still have a vibrant live performance market. It's just, big theater productions, big plays that get released on Broadway and then make their way out to other major markets. It's still there. It's just a less powerful part of the distribution channel. I think we also might see some crossover between Broadway and streaming. Like I said, the Hamilton, I think, is absolutely fascinating. I saw it on Broadway, not with the original cast, unfortunately, but I saw it on Broadway. And then being able to see it again on streaming was actually really quite enjoyable. We might see more of those style productions.
Yeah, Disney has experimented in those even in their movies.
It's really fascinating.
I know your daughter is a Marvel fan, and many of us are. What was the key for Disney acquiring Marvel, and what was the secret to Marvel? Since I've got you online here to ask.
Well, I think, I don't know the details of how that negotiation occurred. I do know that Disney has a distinct brand name that says, a certain group of, a particular type of audience. And I suspect that appealed to the folks who owned the Marvel characters, to say, yeah, we want to be associated with that Disney brand name. And by the way, if you want to talk even more about Disney, one of the things that Disney has that I don't think any of the other studios have is that distinctive brand name. So if I were to say, John, tell me your 5 favorite Disney movies, I suspect you could give me 5.
Yes.
If I were to say, tell me your 5 favorite Sony movies or Paramount movies or even Universal movies, you'd have no idea. Disney's challenge is going to be able to stretch the brand to fit into this big streaming opportunity they have, and we'll see.
Well, what's your view on media piracy now that there's so many platforms, and are the digital streaming services able to protect against piracy more than the studios were able to do?
Yeah, so let's go back to price discrimination. Price discrimination at the product level is based on control. Price discrimination at the bundle level is based on convenience. Piracy damages your ability to control when and in what format people get access to the content. Convenience is actually a wonderful way to compete with piracy, I think. Why would anyone, if you can get Spotify for $10 a month, why would you go to all the hassle of trying to pirate your music? I think in the same sense, why would I pirate a show that I can get easy access to on Netflix? I think giving the customers the convenience of getting content is a great way of fighting piracy. I'll also say the other ways of fighting piracy also work. Shutting down big websites, blocking access to websites. All of our research shows that works. But I think it works hand in hand with making the content easier to access in legal channels.
Well, we talked earlier, you and I, about all the controversy with big tech now. and some of the regulation that Congress is looking at and all these things. That'll be a future webinar for us. But will the tech giants in this area, in the entertainment ones, will they basically control the market and give us challenges like we see in big tech?
This is going to be another, this is going to be a market where you're going to have a couple of dominant firms. To me, the big question is, are those firms Amazon, Netflix, and Google, or are they big studios like Disney, Warner, and Universal? That to me is the big question. And like I say, I'm pretty optimistic, given the changes that the big studios are making, that they can come up with a way to compete.
Okay. Well, there's a number of interesting challenges here in the technology space. What do you see with VR coming out in the future? And do you see that impacting this entertainment industry?
Yeah, VR is a whole wonderful playground. And we've got a lot of tech firms going after it. If you think about this shift from, big experience style performances to individual experience, VR is very much designed to be an individual style experience. It's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the future of the industry.
Another question was, what do you think about the new Google TV with Chromecast? And that has a feature where you can stream videos together with friends elsewhere to give you a feeling of watching in a movie theater. Could this be another game changer?
It's really fascinating. It's really fascinating, some of the innovations that are being brought about because of COVID, and how those might become part of our viewing going forward. There is something fun about watching movies or watching television shows with your friends. I remember a couple of years ago, I was asking my son if he wanted to watch the Super Bowl with me, and he said, "No, I'll just watch the Snapchat story later." Right? And I was like, "Oh, what the heck does that mean?" But what it meant is he was actually going to get a lot more enjoyment experiencing the content with his friends than with his dad. Actually, no, now I'm sad.
That's not a good idea, no.
Anyway, but I think these new technologies actually give you an opportunity. When we just watched Up with my wife's parents remotely. Give you an opportunity to experience that with people, get that same in-person experience with the people you love remotely.
That's great. We haven't heard anything about Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV, all the other big players. And so give me some content on what you see the other major tech players doing in the industry.
Apple may be announcing this as we speak. I don't know. Netflix obviously has some advantages that they're the leader. Amazon has some advantages that they can basically cross-subsidize their entry into video with Prime subscription. I've got to get my Amazon stuff in 2 days, so I'm going to subscribe to Prime regardless. And by the way, I get a bunch of really cool Prime Video on it. I discover the platform, I engage in it. I personally think Apple did something really smart by saying, if you buy one of our big hardware products, we'll give you a free year of Apple TV Plus. Whether they'll continue that going forward, I don't know. And I guess no one on this call knows because they're not watching the Apple event today, but we'll see. And then Google has an advantage because YouTube is so big and so strong in short form video, and they can leverage their understanding of all of my search behavior to customize the interface for me.
So what about the other big studios? We talked a lot about Disney, but tell me about the other ones and what have they done right, and what do you think that they need to do to stay in the conversation and not really have to sell all their content somewhere else?
I think it's been fascinating to see Disney merge with Fox, right? So a horizontal merger to drive scale. I think it's been really interesting to see Warner merge with AT&T, a vertical merger to drive integration up and down the distribution chain. I'm not sure what happens with and again, NBC Universal merging, the merger of NBC
Yeah.
Universal and Comcast, they also have access to the platform. I'm not sure about the other three. I'm sorry, I'm not sure about the other two. I'm not sure about Sony and Paramount. I maybe they're an acquisition target. I don't know. They've both got deep catalogs. They both have very valuable catalogs, but they don't have the streaming platform to get it out there. No
Netflix.
disrespect to any of our alumni at either Sony or
Yeah.
Paramount.
Well, we know we have alumni everywhere, so
Yeah.
and usually in key roles there. Another question came in. Netflix as its biggest competitor wasn't HBO but Fortnite. How does gaming and esports fit into the entertainment space, and what do you think about their future in this streaming world?
Gaming is fascinating because it has that same really tight tie to the consumer. And then if you think about live performances, talk about doing concerts in Fortnite, and that as a key way of artists getting their music out there during the pandemic. I totally agree with you. I think Netflix's closest competitor is gaming, not one of the other studios just yet. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that the decrease in theater demand was inevitable, or do you think that COVID-19 just accelerated or caused that shift?
I think it accelerated an inevitable shift. I think it was going to happen anyway, but I think COVID really accelerated it. In part because all of a sudden people couldn't go, and in part because I really think it changed the balance of power between the exhibitors and the studios.
Okay, running through a few more questions here.
Sure.
What's your take on the strategy to release TV shows on streaming services, one episode per week as opposed to the whole season, so that people can binge?
That's a hard one, and there's some conflicting research out there. So my wonderful colleague Pedro Ferreira has a really nice paper that looks at binging, and what he seems to find is that binging is good for it's good for the consumer, but it actually allows the consumer to get all the content they need, and then they no longer have to subscribe. Jeff Gallick on your faculty actually looks at this and says people binge too quickly, that they would actually enjoy the content more if they were to spread their experience out over a longer period. So this could also be, it could be bad for the platform. It could also be bad for the consumer. The flip side of that, though, is I think, binging has become part of our language, our expectation. And I think it's going to be hard to change those expectations around the consumer, even though my good friend Jeff Gallick says that it's bad, even though I know it's bad for me, I still want to binge all the episodes at once.
That means it's a great program because you want to keep watching it. We have a question here. Just you didn't say a lot about NBC Peacock. What do you think what are they doing right? What do they do? What are they being challenged with?
I again, due respect to the smart people at Universal, I think the ad-supported business model creates this tension between who's the customer. And I've played around a little bit with Peacock. I actually watched a really great doc on Peacock called A Most Beautiful Thing. If anybody wants to watch a really good documentary, go to Peacock and watch A Most Beautiful Thing. That said, the advertisements I found very off-putting relative to Netflix, relative to the experience I'm used to. Yeah.
Well, for our students or people or parents who are thinking their kids want to go into the entertainment industry now, what types of jobs and skills are going to be in demand at these streaming companies? I know from a data analytics standpoint, our alumni that go into that's usually the space that they're going into.
I think I think, talking to the other side of campus, I think this is a wonderful time to be an artist because you've got so many opportunities to tell your story. So I hope people will continue to come to CFA and develop their skills as storytellers and artists, because I think they're wonderful opportunities and we need you guys. On the flip side, in the business, I totally agree with you, John, that data analytics is going to become important. Data analytics is important and is going to become more important because now we've got all this wonderful data about individual consumers, and we've got the opportunity to actually experiment, to conduct real world experiments where we say, what type of content appeals most to John? And how can we get that content in front of him? How should we design our platform in a way that keeps him engaged? These are wonderful data analytics questions.
Well, there is we get a couple questions on AI and how AI is being used in the content development within the entertainment industry.
Yeah, so I've got some strong feelings about this. I don't think AI should be used to replace creators, right? I think AI is great to the extent that we're using it to let great storytellers tell their stories and get those stories in front of exactly the right audience. I don't believe in AI as a way to replace the human storyteller. And honestly, I think that's exactly what we've seen with Netflix, right? Netflix didn't tell David Fincher and Beau Willimon how to write House of Cards. Netflix said, you write the story you want to write, and I'll use my data and AI to get it in front of the right audience. I think that's the right way to do it.
Well, one last question. We're coming to the end of it. I think we could talk all afternoon about this interesting topic. But I want to ask you, do we spend too much time being entertained versus living the adventure of life? And I know from many families have talked to me and said, hey, during COVID, we've been spending a lot more family time. We're doing walks, we're doing adventure. We're spending more time watching programs together. So it seems to have had some positive family things, but I'm wondering if we're spending too much time being entertained instead of just living, and we see that with our young people. So what do you think?
I do. And the real challenge we have, if you think about AI, right? The real challenge I think we have as people who love entertainment in deploying that AI is in deploying it in a way that's responsible. I think we could, deploy the AI in a way that says, here's what I need to do to get John to watch 8 hours of my content consecutively. And I wonder whether we should back off on that a little bit and say, you know what, John needs a break. And I'm going to design my AI in a way, I'm going to design my recommendations in a way that encourages John to behave in a socially responsible way and go take a walk.
Well, John may have to do that on his own too. So no, Mike, thank you so much, Professor Michael Smith at the Heinz College. Outstanding presentation today. So much we could talk about for your students. I know they are so glad to have had you at school and be able to follow up with their research with you. So thank you for joining us today. And for all of our alumni and friends who have joined us on our webinar today, we thank you for being a part of this presentation today, where intellectual research and curiosity is always going on at Carnegie Mellon University. And we're so glad to have you join us today for this webinar. So hope to see you again in the future. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.